The galaxy had watched Earth for a very long time. Hidden behind layers of classified reports and restricted star maps, the small blue planet was nothing more than a story, a warning. The older species called it a death world because everything on that planet seemed designed to kill. The gravity was too strong. The weather was too violent. The animals hunted each other without mercy. And the dominant species, humans, had somehow survived it all. For centuries, the Galactic Coalition treated humanity like a dangerous animal locked in a cage. They watched from a safe distance. They studied. They whispered among themselves about what might happen if those creatures ever left their world. They fight each other constantly, the report said. They have survived diseases that would destroy any other species. They eat plants and animals that contain poison. They live on a planet that tries to kill them every single day. The coalition species had evolved on gentle worlds. Their skies were calm. Their predators were slow. Their wars were rare and fought with strict rules. They could not understand how any intelligent life could come from a place like Earth. So they left humanity alone and hoped the humans would never look up at the stars. But hope is not a strategy. And the galaxy was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The Velthari Empire had been expanding for 200 years. They were conquerors by nature, a species that believed strength gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. When they turned their attention toward coalition space, the gentle species of the galaxy found themselves in a war they did not know how to fight. 60 years passed. 60 years of slow retreat. 60 years of watching their worlds fall one by one. The coalition had more ships, more soldiers, more resources, but they could not win. They fought wars like they were playing a game with clear rules. The Velthari fought to destroy. It was Admiral Vatris who first suggested the impossible. "We need the humans," he said during a secret meeting of the Coalition High Council. The other admirals looked at him like he had lost his mind. "The Death Worlders?" one of them asked. "You want to unleash those creatures into our war?" "I want to survive," Vatris replied. "And right now, survival requires something we do not have. It requires soldiers who know how to fight like the Velthari do. Soldiers who come from violence. Soldiers who do not break." The debate lasted for weeks. In the end, desperation won. A message was sent to Earth, not asking for soldiers, but for advisors, observers. The coalition did not truly believe humans could help them win. They simply wanted to study them, to understand what made a Death World species tick. Commander Taiho received the transmission in his office on the orbital station above Earth. He read it 3 times before he believed it was real. First contact with alien life, and they were asking for military help. He assembled a team of 12, the best Earth had to offer. Captain Yuna was his first choice. She was a tactical officer who had never fought a battle the same way twice. Her commanders called her unpredictable. Her enemies called her terrifying. She read the mission briefing and smiled. "They want observers," she said. "They're going to get a lot more than that." Hajin was the team's combat medic. He had served in 3 wars on Earth and had saved more lives than he could count. His hands were steady and his heart was calm, even when everything around him was chaos. He packed his medical kit and said goodbye to no one. Sora was the youngest member of the team. She was only 24 years old, an intelligence analyst who spent her days studying patterns and breaking codes. She was the one who had first decoded the alien transmission. When Taiho offered her a place on the team, she did not hesitate. "I've been waiting my whole life to see what's out there," she said. The others came from different backgrounds and different wars. Bora was a demolitions expert who could turn everyday objects into weapons. Jiho was a sharpshooter who never missed. Do-hyun was an infantry officer who had led soldiers through impossible situations. Nari was an engineer who could build anything from nothing. Minho was young and eager, barely 23, but he had proven himself in combat exercises that had broken older soldiers. Hyeri handled communications. Yunbi led special operations. Admiral Quan served as the senior military representative, a man who had spent 40 years learning every way that humans knew how to fight. Together, they boarded a ship called the Horizon's Edge and left Earth behind. The journey took 3 weeks. During that time, the team studied everything the Coalition had sent them. They learned about the Velthari, tall, armored beings who fought with plasma weapons and orbital strikes. They learned about the Coalition species, delicate creatures who had never known true violence until the war began. They learned about the battles that had been fought and lost over 60 years. "They're fighting wrong," Yuna said one night, looking at tactical recordings of a Coalition defeat. "Look at this. They line up their soldiers like pieces on a board. They take turns. They retreat when the numbers turn against them." "That's how they've always fought," Tejo replied. "It's honorable." "It's suicide," Yuna said. "The Velthari don't care about honor. They care about winning." She was right, and deep down, every member of the team knew it. When the Horizon's Edge finally arrived at the Coalition flagship Eternal Light, the humans got their first look at the species they had come to help. The Coalition officers were tall and thin, with pale skin and large dark eyes. They moved carefully, spoke softly, and looked at the humans like they were studying dangerous animals. "Welcome," Admiral Vatris said. His voice was calm, but his eyes showed fear. "We are grateful for your presence. We hope to learn much from observing your methods." Tejo nodded politely. "We're here to help however we can." But Yuna was already looking past the Admiral, studying the tactical displays that lined the walls of the command center. She saw the positions of Coalition forces. She saw the advancing Velthari lines. She saw 60 years of failure written in light and color. "You're not going to learn anything by watching us," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "You're going to learn by fighting beside us." The Coalition officers did not understand what she meant. They would soon. In the darkness of space, the Velthari were already moving toward their next target, a supply station on the frontier moon of Keth 4. A small victory that would mean nothing to them. But for humanity, it would be the beginning of everything. The whispers were about to become screams. The Coalition flagship Eternal Light was the largest ship Yuna had ever seen. It stretched for kilometers in every direction, a floating city of metal and light. Thousands of crew members walked its corridors, hundreds of officers planned its battles, and yet, despite all its power, it had never won a single decisive victory against the Velthari. Yuna spent her first 3 days on the ship studying everything she could find. She read battle reports. She watched tactical recordings. She sat in on planning meetings where Coalition commanders discussed their next moves with careful, measured voices. And the more she learned, the more frustrated she became. "They're fighting a war like it's a ceremony," she told Tejo one evening in their quarters. "Every move is planned weeks in advance. Every formation follows exact rules. They even warn the enemy before they attack." "It's their way," Tejo said. "They've never known anything else." "Then they've never known how to win." Admiral Quan agreed with her assessment. The Coalition species had evolved on peaceful worlds where conflict was rare. When wars did happen, they were fought with strict codes of honor. Both sides would agree on the time and place of battle. Both sides would limit their weapons. Both sides would accept defeat gracefully when the numbers turned against them. The Velthari followed no such rules. They attacked without warning. They targeted civilians. They used every weapon they had without hesitation. And for 60 years, the Coalition had tried to fight them using honorable tactics against an enemy that did not understand honor. The result was written in the stars. Hundreds of worlds lost, millions of lives ended, a slow, steady retreat that showed no signs of stopping. 3 days after the humans arrived, the Velthari attacked. The target was a supply station on Keth 4, a small moon on the edge of Coalition space. The station provided food and fuel to ships patrolling the frontier. It was not a military target. It was not heavily defended. But the Velthari wanted it anyway. Admiral Vatris received the distress call during a routine briefing. His face went pale as he read the report. "They have landed ground forces," he said. 2,000 Velthari soldiers. The station has only 300 defenders. The coalition officers immediately began discussing evacuation procedures. How many ships could reach the station in time? How many civilians could be saved? The battle, in their minds, was already lost. Yuna stood up. "We can hold that station." Every eye in the room turned toward her. Admiral Vatris looked confused. "The numbers are against us," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. 2,000 against 300. Coalition doctrine requires withdrawal when— "Coalition doctrine is why you're losing this war," Yuna interrupted. She walked to the tactical display and began pointing at the station's layout. "Look at this. The Velthari landed on the eastern plateau. They'll advance through these main corridors to reach the command center. It's the obvious path." "Yes," Vatris said, "which is why we must evacuate before they arrive. Or we let them come." Yuna's eyes were bright with something the coalition officers did not recognize. It was hunger, the hunger of a predator who had finally found prey. "We let them march through those corridors in their neat formations, and then we kill them." The room fell silent. Tai-Ho stepped forward. "Admiral, I request permission to deploy my team as ground support. We'll reinforce the station's defenders." 12 humans against 2,000 Velthari. Vatris shook his head. "That is not logical." "War isn't logical," Hajin said from the back of the room. "War is chaos, and chaos is where we live." After a long moment, Vatris gave his approval. Perhaps he thought the humans would die and prove that the rumors about Deathworlders were just stories. Perhaps he was simply curious. Either way, he gave them a shuttle and wished them luck. The humans did not need luck. They needed ammunition. The shuttle landed on Keth 4 3 hours before the Velthari reached the station. Yuna took command immediately, working alongside the station's coalition defenders. They were frightened, their large, dark eyes filled with the certainty of death, but they followed her orders anyway. "Forget everything you've been taught," she told them. "Today, we fight like humans." Hajin led a 5-person team into the maintenance tunnels beneath the station. These tunnels were marked as tactically irrelevant in coalition battle plans, small, cramped spaces that no proper army would use. That made them perfect. Bora carried enough explosives to collapse a building. She placed them carefully along the corridors behind the Velthari's expected advance route. When the enemy pushed forward, they would find their retreat cut off. Jiho found a position in a damaged observation tower 900 meters from the main corridor. The tower was considered unusable. Its power was dead and its sensors were destroyed. But Jiho did not need power or sensors. He needed a clear line of sight and a steady hand. Nari turned the station's civilian infrastructure into a nightmare. She rigged doors to explode. She programmed maintenance robots to attack anything that moved. She filled corridors with debris that would slow the enemy advance and create perfect ambush points. Do-hyun organized the coalition defenders into small teams spread throughout the station. He taught them a concept they had never heard of: fighting retreat. They would engage the enemy, fall back, engage again, and fall back again, bleeding the Velthari at every step. When the attack began, the Velthari expected an easy victory. They had won 100 battles against the coalition. They knew exactly how these gentle creatures would fight. They would form lines. They would hold position. They would eventually break and run. The Velthari did not know they were fighting humans now. The first sign that something was wrong came when their advance scouts disappeared. One moment they were moving through the eastern corridors. The next moment their signals vanished. No warning, no distress calls, just silence. The Velthari commander ordered his forces to push forward anyway. They were 2,000 strong. Whatever had killed the scouts would not stop the main force. They were wrong. Hagen's team emerged from the maintenance tunnels behind the Velthari advance. They struck fast and hard, killing 30 soldiers before disappearing back into the shadows. The Velthari turned to pursue and walked straight into Bora's explosives. 3 corridors collapsed at once. Hundreds of Velthari soldiers found themselves trapped between falling debris and an enemy they could not see. In the observation tower, Jiho took his first shot. The Velthari field commander fell with a hole through his helmet. 900 meters, near darkness, a shot that should have been impossible. The second commander stepped forward to take charge. Jiho killed him too. By the time the third commander assumed control, the Velthari formation had broken. Soldiers ran in every direction, trying to escape the chaos. They ran into Nari's traps. They ran into Dohyun's ambush teams. They ran into corridors that led nowhere and doors that exploded when opened. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Velthari had lost over 800 soldiers. The survivors fled to their landing ships and retreated into space. The coalition defenders stood in the ruined corridors, unable to believe what they had witnessed. They had won, not by following doctrine, not by fighting honorably. They had won by fighting like humans. Admiral Vatris watched the helmet recordings aboard the Eternal Light. He played them again and again, trying to understand what he was seeing. The humans moved through combat like water through cracks. They appeared and disappeared. They struck where the enemy was weak and avoided where they were strong. They used the environment as a weapon. "This is not how wars are fought," he said quietly. Yuna stood beside him, her armor still covered in dust and blood. "No," she agreed. "This is how wars are won." The whispers about humanity had already begun to change. On 100 coalition ships, soldiers spoke in hushed voices about what had happened on Keth 4. The Deathworlders had come, and they had proven that the rumors were true. Humanity was everything the galaxy had feared. And for the first time in 60 years, the coalition began to hope. News of the victory at Keth 4 spread through coalition space like fire through dry grass. For 60 years, the coalition had known only defeat. Now, suddenly, there was hope. Soldiers who had spent their entire careers retreating began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the war could be won. The Velthari noticed the change. Their spies reported strange new morale among coalition forces. Their analysts studied the battle recordings from Keth 4 and saw something that worried them deeply. The coalition had not won that battle. Something else had. Something from a death world called Earth. The Velthari High Command made a decision. The humans had to be destroyed before their influence could spread further. One small team had turned a hopeless defense into a massacre. What would happen if there were more of them? What would happen if the coalition learned to fight like Deathworlders? The answer was unacceptable. So the Velthari gathered the largest assault force they had assembled in 20 years and sent it toward a single target, Outpost Gamma 7, where the Human Advisory Team was currently stationed. Yuna received the warning 12 hours before the attack. Coalition intelligence had detected the Velthari fleet moving toward them. 15,000 soldiers, 50 warships, enough firepower to crack a planet in half. The outpost had 2,000 defenders. Admiral Vatris contacted them immediately. "You must evacuate," he said. His voice was urgent, almost pleading. "The Velthari are coming for you specifically. If you leave now, you can escape before they arrive." Yuna looked around the command center at her team. Hagen was checking his medical supplies. Bora was inspecting her explosives. Jiho was cleaning his rifle. None of them showed any sign of fear. "No," Yuna said. "You do not understand," Vatris pressed. "This is not a battle you can win. The numbers don't matter," Yuna interrupted. We came here to show the Coalition how to fight. Running away would teach them nothing. Tai-Ho stepped forward to stand beside her. Admiral, we appreciate your concern, but we're not leaving. We're going to hold this outpost, and we're going to show the Velthari what happens when they target humanity. The communication ended. There was work to do. Do-Yoon took charge of organizing the defense. He had spent months teaching Coalition soldiers basic human combat tactics. Now it was time to see if they had learned anything. Forget your formations, he told them. Forget your rules. Today, you fight to survive. The Coalition soldiers were terrified. They had never faced odds this bad, but something had changed in them since Keth 4. They had seen what was possible when you stopped fighting by the book. They had seen Deathworlders turn certain defeat into impossible victory. Maybe they thought, we can do the same. Nari worked without rest for 8 straight hours. She turned every corridor of the outpost into a death trap. Pressure plates that triggered explosions, ceiling panels that dropped burning chemicals, doors that sealed shut and filled rooms with toxic gas. By the time she finished, the outpost was less a military base and more a machine designed to kill. Minho helped the Coalition soldiers prepare defensive positions. He showed them how to use cover properly, not standing behind it like statues, but moving, shooting, disappearing before the enemy could react. He showed them how to create crossfire zones where anyone who entered would be hit from multiple directions at once. You don't have to be stronger than them, he said. You just have to be smarter. Yeri established communication networks that could not be jammed. If one system went down, another would take its place. If that one failed, there was a third. The Coalition had always relied on centralized command, one voice giving orders to everyone. Yeri taught them to work in independent teams that could make their own decisions. Trust your people, she said. They're smart enough to know what needs to be done. When the Velthari fleet arrived, it blocked out the stars. 50 warships surrounded the small moon where Outpost Gamma 7 stood. Landing craft descended like a metal rain, carrying 15,000 of the Empire's best soldiers. The Velthari commander broadcast a message to the outpost. Surrender the humans and we will spare your lives. Refuse, and you will all die. Yuna answered personally. You want us? Come and get us. The battle began at dawn. The Velthari expected the same easy victory they had won 100 times before. They advanced in perfect formations, their plasma rifles cutting through the darkness. They had overwhelming numbers. They had superior firepower. They had 60 years of experience crushing Coalition resistance. What they did not have was any understanding of what waited for them. The first wave reached the outer perimeter and walked straight into Nari's traps. Explosions ripped through their formations. Soldiers fell screaming as chemical burns ate through their armor. The survivors pushed forward and ran into Do-Hyun's defensive lines. Coalition soldiers fought from covered positions, firing quick bursts and then moving before the Velthari could return fire. They did not stand in neat rows. They did not follow predictable patterns. For the first time in their lives, they fought like chaos itself. The Velthari adapted. They were conquerors, after all. They had faced resistance before. They brought up heavy weapons to blast through the defensive positions. They sent flanking teams to attack from multiple directions. But every time they adjusted, the humans adjusted faster. Hajin led a team of medics through the fighting, dragging wounded soldiers to safety and sending them back into battle within hours. Coalition medical doctrine said wounded soldiers should be evacuated. Hajin taught them that wounded soldiers who could still hold a rifle were the most dangerous fighters of all. They had nothing left to lose. Bora collapsed tunnels that the Velthari tried to use for infiltration. She brought down walls on top of advancing units. She turned the outpost's own structure into a weapon, reshaping the battlefield to favor the defenders. The fighting continued through the day and into the night. The Velthari pushed forward meter by meter, paying for every step with blood. Coalition soldiers fell, but for everyone they lost, they took 5 enemies with them. At the 19th hour, the Velthari broke through a section of the western wall. 100 soldiers poured through the gap, racing toward the command center. Minho was waiting for them. He held that breach alone for 40 minutes. His rifle ran out of ammunition, so he used his sidearm. When that was empty, he used his knife. When his knife broke, he used his hands. Coalition soldiers found him surrounded by Velthari bodies, still standing, still fighting, refusing to fall. Reinforcements finally reached him and sealed the breach. Minho collapsed from blood loss and exhaustion, but he was alive. The line had held. Hieri carried 3 wounded Coalition soldiers to the medical bay under direct fire. Plasma bolts burned the air around her, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Those soldiers were depending on her. "You're insane," one of them whispered as she dragged him through a doorway. "I'm human," she replied. "Same thing." When the sun rose again, the Velthari commander looked at his losses and felt something he had never felt before: fear. His force had lost 60% of its soldiers. The outpost still stood. The humans still lived. He ordered his ships to bombard the outpost from orbit. If he could not take it, he would destroy it entirely. But before the first shots could fire, coalition reinforcements arrived. Admiral Vatris had gathered every ship he could find and rushed to Gamma 7. The Velthari fleet, already weakened by the brutal ground assault, was forced to withdraw. The Battle of Outpost Gamma 7 was over. The coalition had lost 300 soldiers. The Velthari had lost over 9,000. As the enemy ships retreated into the darkness of space, Yuna stood on the outpost's damaged walls and watched them go. Her armor was cracked. Her body was exhausted. But she was smiling. "They wanted to prove we could be beaten," she said quietly. "Instead, we proved they could be broken." Behind her, coalition and human soldiers stood together, covered in blood and dust and victory. They had faced impossible odds. They had refused to run, and they had won. The proving ground had delivered its verdict. Humanity was real, humanity was here, and humanity would not be stopped. After Outpost Gamma 7, everything changed. The story spread to every corner of coalition space. 2,000 defenders against 15,000 attackers, 19 hours of continuous battle, 60% enemy casualties. The numbers seemed impossible, yet the recordings proved they were true. And at the center of every story were the humans. Earth received thousands of messages from coalition worlds. Some were requests for military assistance. Some were offers of alliance. Some were simply expressions of gratitude from species who had spent 60 years watching their civilization crumble. For the first time, the galaxy was not whispering about humanity in fear. They were speaking in hope. The United Earth government made a decision that would shape history. They would send real military forces to join the war. Not advisors, not observers, soldiers. 3 full battalions departed from Earth orbit, 12,000 men and women who had volunteered to fight a war on the other side of the galaxy. General Sunwoo commanded them personally. He was an old soldier who had spent his career preparing for threats that never came. Now, finally, he had a war worth fighting. The coalition welcomed them with ceremonies that lasted for days. Species who had once feared humanity now saw them as saviors. Admiral Vatris, who had initially doubted the Deathworlders, became one of their strongest advocates. "I have studied war my entire life," he said during a joint command meeting. "I thought I understood it. Then I watched a young human hold a broken wall with nothing but a pistol and his bare hands. I know nothing." Taiho had been promoted to colonel. Yuna was now a commodore. The original advisory team had become legends, their names spoken with reverence by soldiers on 100 worlds. But they did not rest. There was too much work to do. The campaign to liberate the Meridian sector began 3 months after the human battalions arrived. The Meridian worlds had been under Velthari occupation for 40 years. Their populations had been enslaved. Their resources had been stripped. Freeing them would require the largest military operation in Coalition history. General Sunwoo worked alongside Admiral Vatris to develop the battle plan. It was unlike anything the Coalition had attempted before. A coordinated assault across 6 star systems, hitting multiple targets simultaneously. The Velthari would not know where to send reinforcements. By the time they figured out the main attack, it would already be over. Taiho called it adaptive doctrine. The idea was simple. No plan survives contact with the enemy, so every unit must be ready to change their approach at any moment. Instead of following orders from a central command, teams would make their own decisions based on what they saw in front of them. It was terrifying to the Coalition officers. It was natural to the humans. "Trust your people," Taiho told them, echoing Hyeri's words from Gamma 7. "Give them a goal and let them find their own way to reach it." The campaign began with Operation Silent Thunder. Sora had spent months studying Velthari logistics. She had mapped every supply route, every depot, every fuel station that kept the occupation forces running. Her analysis revealed a critical weakness. The Velthari had stretched their supply lines too thin. If those lines were cut, their forces would be stranded. Human special forces struck 17 supply depots in a single night. They moved through Velthari space like ghosts, appearing without warning and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. By morning, the occupation forces in the Meridian sector had lost 60% of their supplies. Sergeant Yunbi led the most dangerous mission of the operation. Her target was a depot on Meridian 3, protected by a planetary defense grid that could destroy any ship that approached. Coalition planners said it was impossible to attack. Yunbi found a way. Her team landed on the planet's dark side using captured Velthari transport ships. They traveled overland for 3 days, avoiding patrols and hiding in terrain that the Velthari considered impassable. When they reached the depot, they did not attack it directly. Instead, they infiltrated the defense grid's control center and turned it off from inside. The Coalition fleet arrived 2 hours later. The depot was destroyed. Yunbi's team escaped with 0 casualties. The operation became known as the Ghost Drop. It proved that no target was truly impossible, not if humans were involved. With their supply lines shattered, the Velthari occupation forces began to collapse. Coalition and human forces advanced world by world, system by system. Battles that should have taken months were won in weeks. Victories that seemed impossible became routine. But war always demands a price. On Keth 7, Jiho fell. He had been providing sniper support for a civilian evacuation when Velthari assault troops overran his position. He could have retreated. He could have escaped into the mountains and rejoined friendly forces later. Instead, he stayed. For 2 hours, Jiho held back an entire company of Velthari soldiers, giving the evacuation ships time to launch. He killed over 40 enemies before they finally reached him. When Coalition forces retook the position the next day, they found his body surrounded by Velthari dead, his rifle still clutched in his hands. The Coalition soldiers who found him said he was smiling. Bora was wounded during the assault on Meridian 5. A plasma burst destroyed her left arm, burning through armor and flesh in an instant. The medics wanted to evacuate her immediately. "Not yet," she said through gritted teeth. "I still have one arm. The mission isn't done." She completed her demolition objectives with one hand before allowing herself to be carried to safety. The arm was replaced with a prosthetic. She was back in combat within 6 weeks. The war took pieces from all of them. Hajin carried scars that would never fully heal. Do-hyun walked with a limp from an injury he refused to talk about. Minho had nightmares that woke him screaming in the middle of the night. But they did not stop. They could not stop. The galaxy was depending on them. As the Meridian sector fell, the Velthari High Command began to understand the truth. This was not a temporary setback. This was not a minor inconvenience. The humans had fundamentally changed the nature of the war. For 60 years, the Velthari had fought an enemy that was predictable, an enemy that followed rules, an enemy that could be beaten with superior aggression and firepower. The humans followed no rules. They were not predictable, and their aggression made the Velthari look like children playing at war. Reports began filtering back to the Velthari homeworld. Stories of human soldiers who refused to die. Stories of impossible battles won against overwhelming odds. Stories of Deathworlders who seemed to feed on chaos and violence. "We are fighting something we do not understand," the Velthari Supreme Commander admitted during a secret council meeting. "We thought we knew war. We were wrong." The Meridian sector was fully liberated within 8 months. 40 years of occupation ended by an alliance that had seemed impossible just 2 years before. General Sunwoo addressed the Coalition Assembly after the final victory. Behind him stood representatives from every human battalion, alongside Coalition officers who had fought beside them. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The Velthari Empire still stands. Their homeworld is still untouched. As long as they have the power to threaten innocent worlds, our work is not done." The assembly rose to their feet in agreement. Humans and aliens together, united by blood and sacrifice and shared victory. The legend of humanity had grown beyond whispers now. It was a roar that echoed across the stars, and the Velthari were starting to listen. The fleet that gathered above the Coalition capital world was the largest in galactic history. 3,000 warships from 100 different species filled the space between the stars. Human vessels flew alongside alien craft that would have seemed like magic just 5 years before. Together, they formed an armada that the Velthari Empire could not ignore. Velthara Prime awaited them. For 200 years, the Velthari had launched conquests from their homeworld. They had crushed species that resisted. They had enslaved populations that surrendered. They had built an empire on the belief that strength gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. Now, for the first time, that strength would be tested at home. Yuna stood on the bridge of the assault carrier Defiance, watching the fleet prepare for the jump to Velthari space. She had come so far from the young captain who had first arrived on the Coalition flagship with nothing but confidence and a team of 12. Now she was Rear Admiral Yuna, commander of the human assault forces and the most famous warrior in the galaxy. But she did not feel famous. She felt tired. She felt the weight of every soldier who had died under her command. She felt the scars of battles that had taken pieces of her soul, along with pieces of her body. "Having second thoughts?" Taeho asked, stepping up beside her. "No," she said. "I'm having all the thoughts, every single one. That's what happens when you're about to end a war." The jump to Velthari space took 3 days. The fleet emerged on the edge of the Empire's core systems, where enemy forces were already waiting. The Velthari had gathered everything they had left, every ship, every soldier, every weapon. This would be their final stand. The Battle of Velthara Prime began in the darkness between stars. Human pilots led the first wave of fighter attacks, punching holes in the Velthari defensive lines. Coalition capital ships followed, pouring fire into the gaps. The Velthari fought back with the fury of a dying empire, knowing that everything they had built depended on this moment. Hajin commanded the ground forces aboard the assault ships. He had spent years as a medic, saving lives one at a time. Now he was responsible for thousands of soldiers who would soon be landing on enemy soil. "Remember why we're here," he told them before the drop. "Remember everyone we've lost. Remember everyone who's counting on us. We finish this today." The landing on Velthara Prime was brutal. The Velthari had fortified their world with defenses that had been building for centuries. Plasma cannons tore into the landing craft. Orbital stations rained fire from above. The ground itself seemed to fight against the invaders. But the invaders were humans, and humans did not stop. Do-Yun led the breakthrough at the Crimson Plateau, where the heaviest Velthari defenses were concentrated. His forces had trained for years to fight alongside coalition soldiers. Now that training paid off. Human aggression combined with coalition precision created a fighting force that nothing could stop. "Push forward!" Do-Hyun shouted as plasma fire filled the air around him. "Don't give them time to think! Don't give them room to breathe! Push!" The Velthari line shattered. Soldiers who had never known defeat found themselves running from enemies who simply refused to die. The Crimson Plateau fell in 6 hours, a position the Velthari had believed would hold for weeks. Nari's target was the planetary shield generator. As long as it operated, the coalition fleet could not provide orbital support for the ground forces. Taking it down would crack the planet's defenses wide open. The generator was buried beneath a mountain, protected by walls of metal and stone that should have been impenetrable. But Nari had studied the facility's designs for months. She had found a weakness that the Velthari had never considered. "The cooling system," she explained to her team as they approached through underground tunnels. "The generator produces enormous heat. If the cooling system fails, the whole thing melts down." They reached the cooling control center after 16 hours of crawling through spaces barely large enough for a human body. Nari planted her charges while Velthari guards walked past, never suspecting that enemies were just meters away. When the charges detonated, the cooling system died. 20 minutes later, the planetary shield failed. The coalition fleet immediately began bombardment of military targets, turning the tide of the battle on the surface. Minho accepted the surrender of the Velthari Southern Army. He was only 28 years old, but he had fought more battles than most soldiers saw in a lifetime. The scar on his face was a reminder of Gamma 7, where he had held a broken wall with nothing but determination. The medals on his chest told stories of courage that seemed impossible. The Velthari general who surrendered to him was ancient, his scales gray with age. He had conquered worlds. He had commanded millions. Now he knelt before a young human and offered his weapon. "You are not what we expected," the general said. "No one ever expects us," Minho replied. "That's kind of our thing." It was the first time in history that a human had received an alien military surrender. It would not be the last. The battle lasted 11 days. When it ended, the Velthari Emperor broadcast his unconditional surrender from the throne room of his palace. His voice was empty, defeated, the voice of someone who had watched everything he believed in crumble to dust. "We have lost," he said simply. "The war is over." Across the galaxy, beings of 100 species heard those words and wept with joy. 60 years of fear and death and retreat had finally ended. The Velthari Empire, which had seemed unstoppable, had been broken, and everyone knew who had broken it. General Sunwoo addressed the Coalition Assembly the following day. The chamber was filled with representatives from every species in the Alliance, their eyes fixed on the old human soldier who had led them to victory. Behind him stood the survivors of the original advisory team, Yuna, scarred and exhausted but standing tall, Hajin, whose gentle hands had saved more lives than he could count, Sora, who had grown from a young analyst into a master strategist, Bora, her prosthetic arm gleaming in the light, Do-Yun, Nari, Minho, Hyeri, the humans who had become legends, and empty spaces where others should have been, Jiho, Kwon, Yunbi, who had fallen during the final assault, so many others who had given everything. 60 years ago, you heard rumors of a violent species on a deadly world, Sunwoo began, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. You feared us. Perhaps you were right to. We come from a place that tried to kill us every day of our existence. We learned to fight before we learned to walk. Violence is in our blood." He paused, looking out at the alien faces that watched him with expressions he had learned to read over years of shared struggle. "But we did not come to your stars to conquer. We came because you asked for help. You reached out to a species you feared, and you asked us to stand beside you. That took courage, more courage than anything we've done." The chamber was absolutely still. "We are Death Worlders. We are everything you whispered about in fear. But we are also something else. We are allies. We are partners. We are friends." Sun Wu's voice grew stronger. "And humans have never turned away from a friend in need." The Coalition Assembly rose to their feet, humans and aliens together, applauding with hands and claws and appendages of every shape. The sound filled the chamber like thunder. Yuna felt tears on her face. She had not cried since the day she left Earth. But now, standing here, watching species that had once feared humanity embrace them as family, she could not stop herself. "We did it," she whispered. Taiho stood beside her, his own eyes wet. "No," he said. "We started it. They finished it, all of us together." Humanity was no longer a rumor. They were no longer whispers in the dark. They were real. They were here. And they had earned their place among the stars. Years later, a monument was built on Keth 4, where humans first proved themselves in battle. Representatives from every species in the coalition attended the dedication ceremony. The monument was simple, a stone pillar carved with words in 100 languages. The inscription read, "They came from a world that should have killed them. Instead, it made them strong enough to save us all." Children of 1,000 species grew up hearing stories about the Death Worlders, not whispered rumors of dangerous creatures to be feared. Proud tales of the humans who stood beside the galaxy when the stars themselves seemed ready to fall. And somewhere on a small blue planet called Earth, new generations looked up at the night sky and dreamed of the day they would take their own first steps among the stars. The war was over. The legend was just beginning.